I would like to begin today's presentation with our primary webinar scripture. Do you remember it? Psalm 139, verse 14. And it says, I will praise thee, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Marvelous are thy works, and that my soul knoweth right well. Thank you so much for joining me with this Nature's Fact Extra, which explores a different perspective of complex health concepts explained in an easy, fun way with regards to the immune system, brain barrier breaches, and solutions with helpful tips to solve physiological dilemmas. Not every expert comes from a Christian worldview, but are grasping the God-given intelligence built within us to overcome health obstacles. Today's wellness principle is base hits win the ball game. Please allow me to give a small explanation of this wellness principle. A hit is awarded to a batter who successfully advances to the next base. Each advance is a small success or accomplishment, whether the base hit is a single, a double, a triple, or a home run. The same concept is realized in life. In each health journey, we must recognize each small success or accomplishment that advances us in our health journey. Dr. Tom O'Brien is considered the Sherlock Holmes for chronic diseases and metabolic disorders. He is a clinician par excellence in treating these conditions from a functional medicine perspective. Dr. Tom O'Brien's narrative is exceptionally skillful with storytelling. It extends to unraveling physiological processes, intricate workings with a seasoned detective's finesse. His gift lies in distilling complex findings into digestible nuggets of knowledge, painting a clear picture for all to grasp effortlessly. Through his unique lens, he illuminates paths to solving physiological puzzles, offering invaluable insights and practical solutions that make navigating health's challenges a far less daunting journey. He is also a recognized world expert on gluten and its impact on health. He is an internationally recognized and sought-after speaker and workshop leader, specializing in the complications of non-celiac gluten sensitivity, celiac disease, and the development of autoimmune diseases as they occur inside and outside of the intestines. Here is Dr. Tom O'Brien. Enjoy.
Can I ask, who were some of your kind of earliest inspirational figures that kind of influenced the career path you took?
Well, the first was Dr. Jonathan Wright, an amazing, really spectacular. Amazing is an animated word, and I don't want to use that for Jonathan. Extraordinary is how I would describe him. And in the early 1970s, I had hair down to my waist, and I worked in a health food restaurant. I was a baker, of all things, and we baked the handmade bread. I rolled 48 loaves a day by hand, and it was a destination bread. I mean, people drove to come buy the bread. It was really quite spectacular. It was a yeast-free, unleavened bread that would rise over 24 hours, and then I'd bake it. It was really good. But at that time, Prevention magazine in the U.S. was an exceptional information source for an alternative life. And when you're young, in your late teens, early 20s, and you're a hippie and looking at living on a farm or something, Prevention Magazine had a lot of great articles. And Dr. Wright had just graduated from the University of Michigan Medical School, and I was at the University of Michigan at the time, so I felt this affinity to this guy. And he would write case studies in everyday language of people that would come in and say, "Doc, I got the piles, or whatever their situation was." And then he'd talk to them in everyday language and make a recommendation to change their diet, maybe take some nutrition. And then he put the science and the references of why he was recommending cherries for kidney infections and bladder infections. And he quoted a couple of studies and the nutrition and a couple of studies. And I said, "Oh, this is very cool. This is really very cool." And at that time, I was focusing mainly on martial arts, and I was studying Aikido. And I became quite proficient at Aikido, and I went to Japan, and I lived in the world headquarters. I was a deshi for a while. And when I came back and decided it was time to get married, I needed a real job, and I knew that I couldn't just have a martial arts school and depend on students coming in. My sense of responsibility was greater than that. Needed something more assured for an income of something I'd want to do, and chiropractic was that. So I went to chiropractic school, and by then I'd been reading Jonathan Wright and looking at some of the articles. I'd go to the University of Michigan library and pull up some of the articles he was quoting, and I'd read them. And so I had this sense of a higher quality of life and taking care of yourself. And my first week in chiropractic school, my very first week, was I saw that there was a doctor coming to talk that weekend from Arizona, Mr. Arizona, Dr. Sheldon Deal. I said, "Okay, guy's a bodybuilder. He's a healthy guy. I'll go listen to what he has to say." Opened up his briefcase. Well, he turned on a color television, and color televisions were new things back then. And no volume, but just the color picture. And he went to his briefcase and he took out a bar magnet the size of an iPhone. And he walked up to the color television. The picture went upside down. He'd walk away and the picture went right side up. He'd walk back towards him, the picture went upside down. And he walked away and it went right side up. And he said, "That's what electromagnetic pollution does to your body." And he was talking about batteries in watches were a new thing at that time. So you're putting a battery against your skin. And that opened me up to the world of electromagnetic pollution and how that may affect your body. And people that have a sensitivity to electromagnetic pollution, they tend to say right when they mean left. They write the number 3 backwards, or they know that I before E except after C, but they write it wrong. But they know how to do it right. They say, "Oh, how did I do that?" And it's called neurological switching. So I learned that in my first week of my medical health education. And so it just opened me up right away.
Wow, that's great. I want to talk more with you about EMF a bit later. We're coming at you from the College of Naturopathic Medicine, and you're in fact a patron of the college, and we're always grateful for your support at the college.
Yeah, I think that the college, naturopathic medicine, when people ask me, they say, I want to go to school, I want to be a doctor. And I say, "Okay, good. What kind of doctor?" And they say, "Medical doctor." And I say, "Well, you might want to think twice about that." And they look at me kind of strange. And then I explain about the platform, the premise of medical education, and then the premise of naturopathic and chiropractic education. And I say, if I were to do it again, I'd probably go to naturopathic school. But the structural component, that I learned in chiropractic, has been so critical, very important. But for the wider education and a balanced education, I'd probably go to naturopathic school. So I hope to have people start thinking a little bit more before they blindly go to medicine, thinking that's the exciting career for their passion to help people. My experience of medical doctors coming out of their education is they still have that sparkle of light. They've been beat up by the training that they got, exceptionally beat up with 24-hour shifts and silly things like that. But they still have a little bit of sparkle and excitement, which very quickly dissipates as they're in practice and being told that they really aren't allowed to think very much and they have to follow the protocol of whatever their area of expertise is. It's not the case with naturopathic medicine or chiropractic or acupuncture or more comprehensive health education. So the idea of naturopathic medicine is just excellent.
Excellent. And then you became the autoimmune guru with your book, The Autoimmune Fix, and the Betrayal series. And I've heard you talk a lot about these subjects over the years. But today, I'd like to focus on the brain, if I may. And I was inspired by your latest book, You Can Fix Your Brain. I mean, I got to congratulate you on that book. I love how it was written. It's just very digestible, and you include quite a lot of personal stories, and it's just packed with actionable information. I couldn't recommend it enough.
You know, I had, thank you for that. I had arguments with Rodale Press for 2 weeks about the title. They wanted some different title. I said, no, you can fix your brain. That's the message.
It's a great title. I don't know why they would argue about that, but I thought, as we get in this subject, Dr. Tom, maybe a good place to start is kind of looking at the brain itself from kind of an anatomical perspective. Can you kind of tell us what you believe the key structures of the brain are and their kind of respective functions? What do they do for us?
Well, what's been really shocking is to absorb in the last couple of years. You know, when I find a research article that really captures my attention, I say, whoa, I didn't know that. Sometimes I tape it on the ceiling of my bedroom. And when I go to sleep at night, I'm looking, oh yeah. Wow, yeah, that's really something. And then during the night, I sometimes wake up with an idea. And I think, oh, good, I'll write that down in the morning. And I never remember. Absolutely never have I remembered what I thought of in the middle of the night. So I have this little pad, and there's a pen that goes into the pad, and you pull the pen out, and a tiny little light comes on, just a tiny little light that shines on the note paper. So you can write a note down and not have blinding light, and then go back to sleep. And when I see a paper that captures me like that, where it goes on my ceiling, my goal is, and this has been the goal in all of my presentations all over the world and my books and the videos, is that I hope to capture people's awe so that some aspect of what I talk about, they go, wow, I want to know more about that. And they start thinking about it, because then when they're driving down the 5, California talk,
Yep.
or the I-5. Yeah, the I-5, right? Or here in London, it's the 25, is that right?
M25.
M25, right. You're driving down, and all of a sudden you think about, whoa, really? So that blood-brain barrier, it's made up of the same components as the gut barrier? Really? Wow, so if I am testing for leaky gut and I've got elevated antibodies to zonulin or occludin, but zonulin and occludin are components of the blood-brain barrier also. So wait, so the antibodies are in the bloodstream because I drew blood to test for it, so they're in the bloodstream and the blood goes everywhere. So those antibodies are going through the brain tissue. Would they attack the zonulin in the blood-brain barrier? Yes. And wow. So if I have a leaky gut test result, does that suggest that I likely also have a leaky brain? Yes. Wow. That kind of awe is what my goal has always been in presentations. And to your question, it was Michael Gershon, I believe he's from Princeton, in 1999 that published the book, The Second Brain. And back then, he told us, for every message from the brain going down telling the gut what to do, there are 9 messages from the gut going up telling the brain what to do. The ratio is 9 to 1. So, and the technical term that we use is modulates. So what that means is that messages from the gut modulate brain function, your neurotransmitter levels, and what I tell patients, your brain hormones, they're not really hormones, but your brain hormones called neurotransmitters. The amount that you make of those brain hormones determines to a very large degree that the balance of all these chemicals going through your brain determines how your brain functions. And the control of the balance of neurotransmitters is from your gut, that the gut modulates, which means has its hands on the steering wheel of how your brain functions. So just turn the steering wheel 5 degrees to the right, and within less than a minute, you're off the road. So when you have an imbalance in your gut, your brain function goes off the road. You get moments of depression or anxiety, and as it progresses, the imbalances get worse, the symptom patterns manifesting get worse. So when you ask me about the most important structures of the brain, I'm going to tell you it's your gut, and it's your microbiome of your gut is critically most important. No doubt, no discussion. Other areas are important, of course, But who has their hands on the steering wheel of how your brain functions? It's your microbiome in the gut.
Wow.
One more point to that. Professor Yehuda Schonfeld is commonly referred to as the godfather of predictive autoimmunity. This guy at Tel Aviv University in Israel, last time I interviewed him, 26 of his MD PhDs who received their PhD in immunology from him, 26, there are many, many more, but 26 of them chair departments of immunology in med schools and hospitals around the world. They're his students. This is the godfather.
Yeah.
And he tells us that 36% of all the small molecules in your healthy blood are the metabolites of the microbiome in your gut. 36% of everything in the bloodstream, all the small molecules in the bloodstream, are the metabolites of the microbiome. Now you put that on the ceiling of your bedroom. What condition that a patient presents with that's a chronic condition will not be affected by an imbalance in the microbiome, which we call dysbiosis? What condition? If 36% of everything in the bloodstream, all the small molecules, are the metabolites of the microbiome. What condition? Acute trauma. Aside from that, every physiological condition that can happen to us that knocks us out of balance has as a contributor, and often the major trigger, an imbalance in your microbiome. It doesn't matter if it's your brain, your kidney, your heart, your lungs, your liver. Just Google liver and microbiome. Just Google kidney and microbiome. Just Google thymus function and microbiome. Here come the studies, study after study after study. So put that on the ceiling of your bedroom. And what happens is you start to realize, whoa, this is really important, having a balanced, diverse microbiome.
How ahead of his time was Hippocrates?
Yeah.
He said all disease begins in the gut.
Well, you know, I think all of the true greats in health over time, all of them, they had a connection to another level. And I think that we all have that connection as a possibility, but we just don't put things on the ceiling of our bedroom to think outside the box of what we're told. Yeah. And, you know, the more you contemplate some aspect of the area that you're interested in, the more you expand. You know, I've heard before, you can solve any problem if you could focus your thinking for 3 minutes on it. And you know, I can't do that. I can't focus. Other thoughts start coming in all the time.
Mm. And so with that much in your bloodstream as metabolites from the microbiome, you know, what's this blood-brain barrier? You know, how isn't that supposed to protect your brain from these?
Yeah. The way I explain it to patients is I explain about barriers. I say, Mrs. Patient, your digestive tract is a tube that goes from your mouth to the other end. It's one big, long tube. If you could take a donut and just stretch that donut out and you look down the center of the donut, that's your digestive tract. So when you swallow food, it's not in your body. It's in the tube. And it's got to go through the walls of the tube to get into the bloodstream. How does that happen? You know, how do the vitamins and minerals and proteins, and carbohydrates and sugar, the fats, how do they get into the bloodstream? They've got to go through the walls of the tube. That's the only way. And your tube is lined. Now, in the States, we call it cheesecloth. Here,
Muslin.
in London,
Muslin.
Yeah,
Muslin.
Yeah, like
muslin.
your grandmother used to pour the gravy through the muslin, and then the liquid comes out the other side, but the clumps all stay there. Yeah. So the inside of your digestive tract is lined with muslin, so that only the tiniest molecules, after they've been broken down really small. Think of a raspberry. If you look at a raspberry, there's so many parts, you know, but they all look the same. Digestion is breaking down the raspberry into each part of the raspberry, and smaller, and so it's a clump, and then it's a smaller clump and a smaller clump until you get to each little part of that raspberry that goes right through the muslin, right through the cheesecloth into the bloodstream. That's absorption. That's why digestion is so important, and we always have to make sure our patients have more than adequate digestion to break down the foods. You know, you can eat the best food in the world. If you can't absorb it, it's not going to help you, right? Or minimally, it'll help you. So the molecules go through the muslin into the bloodstream. That's the purpose of an epithelial barrier. It means the lining, the inside lining of the tube. That's your epithelial barrier. You have epithelial barriers to your gut, to your lungs, to your brain, to your kidneys, to your testes. We have these epithelial barriers throughout the body, so only certain size molecules can get through into the bloodstream. The blood-brain barrier is the same thing. So stuff's now in the blood, but not all those molecules in the blood should be able to get into the brain. Only really tiny ones, much smaller. They're small enough to get through the barrier of the gut into the bloodstream, but too big to get through the barrier of the brain from the blood into the brain. That's the blood-brain barrier. But when you have a leaky brain, you get tears in the muslin. And so these molecules get into the brain that are not supposed to get in there. Now we have 4 different immune systems. We've got an immune system in our gut. That's the majority, 70 to 80% of the immune systems in the gut. Depends on what study you read on that. Immune system in your liver, completely separate. Immune system in the bloodstream, we call those antibodies, and immune system in the brain. And the immune system in the brain, the immune system in your gut, it's like the sheriff in town, in the old town. He had a couple of 6 guns, on his hip, keeping the peace. But then the immune system in the blood, that's the marshal. The marshal has a bigger territory to cover, and he's got a rifle, not just the pistols. He's got a rifle. Those are antibodies. They're special forces. But the immune system in the brain, they've got bazookas. We call them glial cells, and those bazookas, anything that gets through the blood-brain barrier, the bazooka fires. And there's this explosion to destroy because your brain tissue is so much more sensitive than most other tissue in your body. So the protection has to be even greater. So the barrier, the epithelial barrier, is tighter, and the immune system, in case anything gets through that blood-brain barrier, is the most powerful immune component in our bodies, those glial cells. They just lay there dormant. They're like the soldiers at Buckingham Palace with those big hats. They're as stiff as can be, but don't mess with them. They look dormant, but don't mess with those guys. Don't mess with them. And that's the glial cells in the brain. Don't mess with those guys. The problem is when you get a breach of the blood-brain barrier, tears in the muslin, I call it leaky brain, and I use B4, capital B number 4, the breach of the blood-brain barrier. When you get B4, you've got a continual invasion of larger molecules. They can be healthy molecules, good proteins or good carbohydrates, but they're not supposed to be able to get into the blood-brain through the blood-brain barrier. But they do, which activates that immune system, firing off to destroy whatever that is, and the collateral damage that occurs to your brain tissue as a result of that ongoing assault of something getting through the breach of the blood-brain barrier, the collateral damage, it damages the brain tissue itself. And when you damage brain tissue, this is patient, you have an entire new body every 7 years. Every cell in your body regenerates, every cell. Some really quick and some slow, but every cell. Well, how does that happen? Well, you have to get rid of the old and damaged cells and make room for new cells. That's why when you do a blood test to check someone for a thyroid problem, as an example, you include looking at thyroid antibodies to see if there's an autoimmune mechanism going on. And if you have elevated thyroid antibodies, that's an autoimmune mechanism. Your immune system is attacking your thyroid. But when you get the test result back, there's a reference range of normal. When is it normal to have antibodies to your own tissue? Why is it normal? Well, because you have to get rid of the old and damaged cells, and the antibodies are a part of that. But when you have elevated antibodies to your thyroid, in this example, you're killing off more cells than you're making. And when you do that, you're losing thyroid function. And it takes time. It takes a few years. Usually the average is 7 years before you get diagnosed with Hashimoto's thyroid disease. But the mechanism has been going on for 7 years, right? So that whole concept of the development of autoimmunity is so prevalent in the brain, and so few people talk about it. But the technology is out now to test this. And when you test for antibodies to your brain tissue, there's a normal reference range because you got to get rid of the old and damaged cells to make room for the new cells. But when you have elevated antibodies to your brain tissue, you're killing off more cells than you're making. And it's startling to see. We now have the technology in the US, and I know the lab is very willing to come to Europe. And I believe there are ways for practitioners to order these tests now. But this technology is extremely accurate, 97 to 99% sensitivity and specificity. And you do a test that I contributed to a little bit in putting together that looks at 53 different antibodies to your brain, 53. And you look at it, whoa, I've never seen a normal come back ever on a first test, because everyone has brain inflammation going. You live on the planet, you're breathing the stuff in the air from chemtrails. You're the exhaust from the highway that's just a mile away from you. Well, it's a mile away. Yeah, but it's 24/7, every day, every week, every month, every year. That particulate matter is inside your house. So we all have some level of brain inflammation going on. It was startling to see how frequent it is. Just startling.
What are some of the signs, kind of just of maybe you've got some brain inflammation or a breach of the blood-brain barrier? What are kind of some of the common symptoms that people might experience?
Brain fog is one of the earlier symptoms to see, but memory gaps. Oh, I'm getting old. I'm just not remembering the way I used to. Really? How old are you? Well, I'm 36. No, that's not supposed to happen. That's not getting old. That's inflammation killing off brain cells. When we talk about Alzheimer's as an example, there was a strategy session in July of 2019. A report was published in July of 2019 of the group that had been brought to Washington, D.C. from all over the world, mostly the U.S., but some from Europe and Oxford, about Alzheimer's and what are we going to do? Because a couple of legislators had realized that this is going to bankrupt our economy. And it certainly has that threat. And they came out with a graph as part of their report. And I will send you the graph so you can include it in the notes for this interview. And when you look at the graph, I said, oh, this is gold. I put it on my ceiling and I said, this is gold. Because you look at it and you go, oh, yeah, okay. But when you really evaluate each section of this graph, so the first asymptomatic period is 25 years of elevated inflammation in the brain. 25 years, elevated antibodies, killing off brain cells, killing off brain cells, killing off brain cells, killing off brain cells. Then you start to get some minor symptoms, which memory loss, brain fog, which goes for 5 to 7 years. Then you get diagnosed somewhere down the road with cognitive decline, another few years. Then you get diagnosed with mild Alzheimer's, 2 to 3 years. Then you get diagnosed with moderate Alzheimer's, 2 years. Then you get diagnosed with severe Alzheimer's. But the mechanism's been going on for 30 to 40 years, most of it before you have any symptoms. And we'd start joking in our 20s or 30s saying, oh, I'm getting old. I don't remember the way I used to. Ha ha ha. No, wake up. Your brain's inflamed. And now we have the tests that we can identify that are highly sensitive and specific. According to Mayo Clinic's published a number of papers on this technology called silicone chip technology. And the way that I reference that is, I do this all the time, on stage. I will say, if I had told you in 1990 that, in about 20, 30 years from now, I'm going to hold this little black thing in my hand, the size of a good-sized wallet, right? And I'm going to just poke on it a little bit, push a couple of numbers here on this. I'm just going to push on it a little bit. I've got the encyclopedia of the world in my hand, and I can tell you anything you want. If I had told you that in 1990 or 1995, you would have thought I was a nutcase watching too much Star Trek, that it was beyond the realm of what we could imagine. It was beyond the realm. Well, this technology improves, and that's the case in laboratory medicine. Technology is improved. And when you do a little research for the labs that you're currently using, you find their technology was designed in 1984 or 1990. It's 20, 30, 35 years old. It's good, it's what we've counted on, but it's wrong somewhere between 2 or 3 out of 10 times, completely wrong. And I challenge doctors now all the time on stage. I say, you need to do double blinds with your lab, which means when you do venipuncture and draw some blood, take a second tube out of that same arm. Don't do another venipuncture, the same arm, take a second tube. You label the second tube Joe Smith, and then you send it to the lab ordering the same test that you're ordering for your patient, but a different name. Don't tell the lab you're doing it. You have to pay for it yourself, so this is your investment in confidence in the laboratories that you're using. But when the results come back, you find 2 or 3 out of 10 times, they're completely different. And you don't know whether to talk to the patient about the good results or the bad results. And you're left with a deflating moment. Well, what does that mean for all the tests I've run with this lab over the years? How many of them are right and how many are wrong? And doctors don't want to do that. Oh, you can't do that. Oh, it's too expensive. You're investing in your future and the health of your patients, their lives, actually. And you find that the laboratory you're using, you have to do at least 5 of these, because, if one comes back similar, okay, great, but do 5. and find out once again. And, I've done that with my labs over the years, and it costs you a little bit of money to do it, but then you're that much better a doctor because you've got confidence in what you're using. And I've done that with Vibrant Wellness, this is silicone chip technology. I did 5 of them, and they were within 2 to 3% every time, so I stopped. I don't need to. I'm confident, but you need to do that. And when you do the Neural Zoomer Plus, looking at 53 antibodies to your brain, and you see you never get a normal back. And I shouldn't say it like that, but I've never gotten a normal back on a first test. The follow-ups a year later better be really good, or you've not done your job very well, right? And it may be that they had 12 markers out of balance, and now on the follow-up they've got 3. And the patient, and if you didn't do the test originally, and you're only doing this one a year after you start your protocols, and there's 3 of them out of balance, you're likely to say, oh, I guess this protocol really didn't work very well because there's still, these are out of balance. No, it works really well. You've 75% improved. Just keep up, and let's make sure we're not missing anything. You've got to do the initial, and then you've got to do the follow-up after whatever period of time you would suspect has been adequate to make the physiological change. Wish I had stock in this company because they're growing so fast because doctors are in awe of the tools that they now have and the results they're getting.
Wow, amazing. I'd like to talk, if I may, with you about some of the most common kind of assaults to the brain and the blood-brain barrier.
Yeah.
You mentioned toxins when we first started this conversation. I'm sure that's a big part of it.
Yeah, the big picture concept on here is that it's chronic, low-grade inflammation in your bloodstream that is the mechanism in the development, as far as I know, every chronic disease. The Center for Disease Control tells us that 14 of the 15 top causes of death in the world today are chronic inflammatory diseases. The only one that's not is incidental injuries, accidents. Everything else of the top 15 are chronic inflammatory diseases. Chronic means they've been going on for a long time. Inflammation, and the way I explain it to patients, Mrs. Patient, if you pull at a chain, the chain always breaks at the weakest link. It could be at one end, the middle, your other end. It's your heart, your brain, your liver, your kidneys, wherever the weak link is. And inflammation is the pull on the chain. So when you have this inflammation pulling, your weak link is breaking. And how is that determined? By your genetics and by your antecedents. It's a geeky word that means how you live your life. I mean, if you eat tuna fish 2-3 times a week, you likely have mercury toxicity. Almost all the tuna in the world has high levels of mercury, right? So that's an antecedent. And mercury accumulates in the brain and other tissues, but so brain inflammation may be very likely for you. So you pull on that chain and the brain connection may be where it shows itself. But it's always inflammation, always. So in dealing with any chronic condition, any complaint, the primary question that has to be asked, and in the book, Integrative Cardiovascular Medicine that Dr. Mark Houston put out in 2019, I wrote a chapter in there on wheat-related disorders and cardiovascular disease, and I identified that it was 1986 in the world of cardiology when it was irrefutable that atherosclerosis is a chronic inflammatory disease. They used to think it was a lipid storage disease, and they realized back then in 1980, no, it's not. It's inflammation that's causing this. And that was 1986. And I pointed out, so the cardiologist is now caught and has to have 2 separate lines of thinking. The first, reduce the symptomatology the patient's presenting with. And that is the value of medical training and pharmaceutical training to reduce the high blood pressure. But the separate line of thinking is, where is the inflammation coming from that's causing the high blood pressure? They're separate lines of thinking. And that's true with every chronic inflammatory disease. And most of our natural care practitioners, healthcare practitioners, are stuck the way most cardiologists are stuck. They're addressing the symptom patterns, and they stay focused on the symptom pattern, and they are not addressing the mechanism that's causing the symptom pattern. You have to stop pulling on the chain. So you have to be looking at where are the sources of inflammation coming from. Critically, critically important. NASA did the studies on this. They published the studies and they financed and then published the studies on houseplants and how houseplants absorb over 74% of the toxins in the air. Why did they do that? Because the astronauts were going loopy up in the space station, making comments and answers that back home, they said, what did he just say? They never talked about that with the press. You know, that's not public knowledge, but you read the science and that's what was going on. And they realized it was all of the particulate matter in the air outgassing from the plastics on the dash panels and the buttons, the phthalates in the air. So they financed studies to see how are we going to get rid of the phthalates in the air, because you can't get rid of the plastics. And so you go to my website, thedr.com/plant, and there's the handouts and there's the summary of what plants you use. 2 6-inch house plants in a 10 by 10 foot room absorb 74% of the toxins in the air. So you go to the local nursery and you buy 20 plants, little plants, and you put 2 in each of the rooms, especially in your kids' rooms. And if you say, oh, I've got a brown thumb, plants don't grow for me, then you're going to buy more when they die. But you just buy more because every day they're absorbing the toxins out of the air, so you're not breathing them, because we inhale this and it goes right up to the brain. And, you know, this is really interesting. The only nerves in the body that have absolutely no screen, excuse me, I'm hitting the screen with my computer. I'm half Italian, you know. The only nerves in the body that have no screen before they go into the brain are the nasal, nerves.
Olfactory.
The olfactory, thanks, that was the word I was looking for. The olfactory nerves are the only ones that have no screening, no filters, no brakes. They just go straight back to the memory center of the brain. Why? It was a life-saving mechanism from our ancestors that they had to be able, when they're walking down the trail, to smell saber-toothed tiger really quickly and turn around and go the other way. Or when they were foraging for food, which was their primary concern in life, food, shelter, safety, reproduction, usually in that order. Now, some of you out there think your husbands have them reversed and they just won't leave you alone, right? But they find something. The first thing they do, they pick it up off the ground, they smell it. They had to identify, is this a threat? Then they nibble on it, then they eat it. So the olfactory nerves, and they go right back to the hypothalamus, right back to the memory center, so you can recognize this is a threat. So those nerves are the most important for survival. They're the only ones that get to the brain without any filters at all. So you look around your room, wherever you are right now. You're driving in your car, listening to this. Look around the car. What are the materials that you're sitting inside this box right now? Plastic and cloth seats or leather seats that are soaked in flame retardant chemicals outgassing into the air. The carpet-like material that's soaked in flame retardant materials outgassing into the air. The rubber pedal for the accelerator and the brake that are outgassing into the air. You're breathing all, that's why every person who's driving a car should get a little negative ion generator. They, $50 on Amazon, and they plug into your cigarette lighter. And so you're always cleaning the air. They just capture all of that particulate matter, or I don't know all, but most of it. My cars have had negative ion generators since I first learned about this in 1984. And now my car has 3 cigarette lighters in it. And I took out the cigarette lighter thing and disposed of it. And I got 3 negative ion generators. So, and people have always said my cars always smell new. It's because they're fresh and they're clean. And there's no air scent with this, but it's just a protective mechanism. Get that stuff out of your environment and your home. You look in your home, if you're at home right now, just look around the room. Plastic shades on the windows, they're outgassing phthalates into the air. Oh, I don't smell anything. Well, we'll put that on your tombstone. He didn't smell it. But, if you look at the window through the right lighting, you see the dust in the air sometimes, depending on the time of day. You're breathing all of that, and it's going right up to the hypothalamus, right up there, unfiltered, right up to the hypothalamus. So when we talk about what are the main triggers to brain inflammation, it's the environment. The environment is very, very common. And the other main trigger, because of the amount of chemicals, toxic chemicals, is what's on the end of your fork. And in that category, the one food that Head and Shoulders is above all others is wheat, because wheat is the only food that activates toll-like receptor 4, your sentry, standing guard to protect you against bugs, in every human when they consume it. Maureen Leonard, famous gastroenterologist at Harvard, published in the Journal of the American Medical Association her literature review on that topic in 2017. And 60 plus studies that she looked at. And what was the consensus? Gluten activates an immune response in the proximal part of the small intestine in all humans who consume it. There's no other food that does that. Now, sometimes tomatoes can activate toll-like receptor, or sometimes dairy can, but it's not all the time. Wheat is the only food that is misinterpreted as a harmful component of a bug, because these undigestible proteins, these peptides, the amino acid structure of these peptides look like the outer surface of a bacteria. And this is your life-saving mechanism from our ancestors from ancient days, because they're picking up food off the ground. First, they smell it, then they nibble at it, then they eat it. And if there were bugs in there that hydrochloric acid didn't kill, they get into the proximal part of the small intestine. That's where toll-like receptor 4 is just sitting there, as dormant as can be, but scanning everything that comes out of the stomach. And when it sees a bug, it goes into action immediately. It does two things. It activates zonulin production. That's leaky gut. That's the mechanism, because zonulin opens up the tight junctions. And so now you get more water coming into the lumen of the intestine to wash out the bug with the bowel movement. It's a life-saving. Leaky gut's not bad for you. Excessive leaky gut is bad for you. And the second mechanism toll-like receptor does when it recognizes a peptide of wheat is it activates NF-kappa B, the major amplifier of our innate immune system. So then here come all the inflammatory cytokines, IL-1 beta, IL-6, IL-12, IL-17. They all get activated when toll-like receptor 4 says, we got a problem here. And all humans do this every time they eat wheat. This occurs in all humans who consume wheat. One last point on that. Some of the components of wheat are more powerful at activating toll-like receptor 4, meaning it takes less than other components of wheat. And one of the worst of them all are amylase trypsin inhibitors in wheat, which is a protective mechanism in wheat. So if a bug eats that wheat plant, the amylase trypsin inhibitor causes leaky gut and the bug dies. So it's a survival mechanism for wheat. And amylase trypsin inhibitors activate toll-like receptor 4 in nanomolar concentrations. A nanomolar is a billionth of a gram. Now look at your thumbnail and imagine how much is a billionth of a gram. You put that study on your ceiling and you go, what? What? Then you understand, you begin to understand this dilemma about wheat that we are in right now, the most common grain in the westernized world. Then you understand this dilemma a little bit more.
Wow. And even with ancient heritage grains and 24-hour yeast-free, proving like that bread that you grew up with.
It's unfortunate. I hate saying it. You know. But yeah. Oh, the studies are really clear. Spelt, Emmer, Kamut, they all activate toll-like receptor 4. The protein structures of these incompletely digested proteins, the peptide structure of these incompletely digested proteins activate toll-like receptor 4. There's no question.
Dr. Tom, you mentioned phthalates earlier, and I wonder if we could talk a little bit about endocrine disruptors. You know, what are they, and what are some common examples of them, and how are they harmful to the brain?
Yeah, that's a huge topic. It's the reason why autoimmune diseases are so much more common in women than men, is that women have many, many more estrogen receptors than men do. And unfortunately, so many of these endocrine disruptors bind to estrogen receptor sites in the body. So the more exposure you get, the magnitude is huge. If a woman gets exposed to X amount of a particular chemical compared to a man being exposed to the same amount of that chemical, the impact factor on a woman is so much greater because she's got so many more estrogen receptors. And these chemicals bind in there. And, you know, a really good, simple example we've known about for so many years is chlorine and the thyroid. That chlorine binds onto thyroid receptor sites. And the way a receptor site works is that in baseball, you know, I'm an American, so I talk about baseball. In baseball, the pitcher throws the ball to the catcher. And that glove is a receptor. Well, the hormones are traveling through our bloodstream, and hormones will go into a particular receptor site. Estrogen goes into estrogen receptor sites. Estrogen does not go into a thyroid receptor site. Insulin goes into insulin receptor sites. Insulin will not go into a testosterone receptor site like that, in general. A few exceptions, but in general. So with chlorine goes into thyroid receptor sites. Now, when thyroid hormone goes into a thyroid receptor site, it turns the doorknob, it unlocks the lock, turns the doorknob and opens the door for the thyroid hormone to go inside a cell. That's what receptor sites are for. They're the entry into a cell. And so to carry a compound into the cell. So thyroid hormone goes into a thyroid receptor site, opens the door, and allows the thyroid hormone to go inside the cell. And, well, there's so many functions, but one regulates your metabolism. It's the furnace inside every cell of your body. You know how you've got a thermostat on the wall controlling the temperature in the house, and at nighttime you turn it down because everyone's asleep, so it's a little cooler in the house. You're saving fuel in the wintertime, and then it's programmed so it automatically turns back up in the morning. That's a thermostat. Thyroid hormone is a thermostat inside every cell of your body. There's only two substances that I know of that have receptor sites on every cell in the body. Only two, as far as I know. One is thyroid hormone because it controls the temperature of how that cell works. We call that your metabolism. And vitamin D. That's the only substance that has receptor sites on every cell of your body. So the problem with these endocrine disrupting chemicals is that they go into the estrogen receptor sites, and using the thyroid receptor site as an example, chlorine goes into the thyroid receptor site, but it doesn't open the door. It sits in the receptor site. So what happens when it sits in the receptor site? More chlorine goes in, more chlorine goes into the receptor site until, in the game of baseball, the catcher has 4 baseballs now inside his glove. And the pitcher throws the ball to the catcher. There's no room for the ball, so it bounces out. There's no room for thyroid hormone to get inside the cell because the receptor is all full of chlorine. So you can't open the door for the hormone to get inside. Those are people that have obvious thyroid symptoms, but the blood test says your hormone levels are normal. And your TSH is high. So what's TSH? TSH is not a measure of thyroid function. TSH is produced by the pituitary to tell the thyroid how much hormone to make. So if your cells are not getting enough hormone, irrespective of what's in the bloodstream, the cell's saying, I need more hormone, I need more hormone. And so the pituitary, the control sergeant at the police station telling all the police officers where to go, that's your pituitary. And the pituitary is telling your thyroid, make more hormone, make more hormone, make more hormone. So your TSH level goes up, but the hormone levels are normal in your bloodstream. It's because the receptor sites. It's often because the receptor sites are all plugged up with endocrine disrupting chemicals. So take that concept to any estrogen receptor site in the body and just Google receptors. How many different tissues have estrogen receptor sites? Put it on the ceiling of your bedroom. Then you start to understand the impact of endocrine disrupting chemical exposure and why women have such a higher incidence of autoimmune diseases than men.
And what are some of those key endocrine disrupting compounds?
Oh my goodness. Chicago, 2016, 346 pregnant women in the 8th month of pregnancy. They measured their phthalate levels. And they only looked at 5 of the phthalates. There are many more, but they looked at 5, including BPA, bisphenol A, that many of us have heard about. And we're now saying, oh, I'm drinking from BPA-free bottles, plastic bottles. No, it's BPS, which is worse. It is worse. It's a much stronger effect. So they measured the phthalate levels in women's urine in the 8th month of pregnancy, and they put them into 4 categories, the lowest, the next, the third, and the highest category. Then they followed the offspring of those pregnancies for 7 years. When the child turned 7 years old, the researchers got back in touch with us. Hi, it's time now to check your child's IQ, and we'll do this at no charge to you, of course. And so they checked the IQ of every one of these kids. Every child whose mother was in the highest category of phthalates in urine in pregnancy, their IQ was 7 points lower than the kids in the lowest level. 7 points, which 6.7 to 7.4 points lower, which means nothing to anyone that's listening to this, because you don't know about IQs, until you learn that a 1-point IQ is noticeable, a difference is noticeable. A 7-point IQ difference is a difference between a child working very, very hard in school, getting straight A's, really doing well, and a child working very, very hard in school, the same effort, getting C's, barely passing. This child doesn't have a chance of excelling, ever. And then you just Google phthalates and neurogenesis, nerve growth. Here come the studies. The higher the phthalate exposure, the more inhibition of brain cell growth and connection. And these are the kids that have problems with reasoning, with emotions. I believe it's a common cause of attention deficit disorder and autism, is that their brains never developed properly because mom was high in phthalates. Now, where did mom get the phthalates? Nail polish. The phthalates are in your bloodstream in 4 to 5 minutes. But there's no evidence that the amount of phthalates that leach into your bloodstream in 4 to 5 minutes when you apply nail polish is toxic to humans. There is no evidence. And that's how they got away with all of this. But these exposures are accumulative in the body over time. So give me a 5-year-old girl that's painting her 10 little fingers and 10 little toes once a week. Give me 25 years of that. Now she's a 30-year-old freshly married woman, gets pregnant, hopefully has a healthy pregnancy and a healthy delivery. And the baby's IQ will never develop the way it should because of the phthalate accumulation in that person that developed over 25 years.
Wow. You know, you mentioned plastics. You know, this is a real problem. BPA, I hear that the biggest source of that is coffee cup lids, perhaps, till receipts. PCBs, another one, right? Is it?
Yeah. There are so many organophosphates, organochlorines, heavy metals. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. So you put it on your ceiling, and then you just start exploring. Okay, what are the sources of this? And then you start learning, how do I reduce my exposures for me and my family? And that's what you teach your clients about. You've got to learn first. And if you're sitting there with regular nail polish and lipstick and makeup, 50, 70 chemicals that you're putting on your body every single day, and you're telling your patients, well, you can't use nail polish anymore, and you're using the standard nail polish, you haven't taken the time to look for organic, phthalate-free nail polish, you're a hypocrite. Excuse me, but you're a hypocrite. You want to be a healthcare practitioner? You put the stuff on your ceiling that excites you to learn about, and you get to be an expert because you're putting the extra time in, and your colleagues have not read those extra studies because, you know, they didn't put it on their ceiling. That's how I got into gluten. I mean, I was a baker making the best bread in the world. Gave me blood sugar problems because I'd take a thick slice coming out of the oven and I'd pour honey on it and then peanut butter for protein and then sliced bananas, and it was a blood sugar time bomb. Right?
That was my lunch going to school, you know, love
exactly.
that.
Yeah, it was really good, you know, but, you know, once you learn this stuff, and if you want to do your best in the world, you just say, I really like croissants. Why can't I have a croissant?
So, Dr. Tom, maybe it's a nice point to shift towards solutions, you know, to fixing your brain. And in your book, you explain this concept of the pyramid of health. I wonder if you could kind of explain what you mean by that.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, that's a critical concept for our practitioners. You can't be an expert in everything, but you need to know about everything so that you can bring in the team to help your client. And I look at health from, I grew up, and one of my mentors in healthcare was Dr. George Goodhart, the founder of applied kinesiology, the muscle testing that so many doctors use. And in applied kinesiology, they had the symbol of the triangle of health. And the triangle of health talked about structure, emotional, chemical, and emotional, spiritual, and chemical. Well, there's actually a fourth side, so it's not a triangle. It's a pyramid. What a pyramid has 3 sides? No, it has 4. There's also a base. And I had a conversation with Dr. Goodhart a couple of years before he died on this topic, and I said, you know, Dr. Goodhart, I don't think it's a triangle. I think it's a pyramid. And he looked at me, and he just got this little twinkle to his eye, you know, and he said, well, what do you mean, Tom? And I said, well, you know, we've got the spiritual or emotional, can cause any health problem, any. We've got the biochemistry where almost everyone focuses, that can cause any health problem. And we've got the structure, so home of chiropractic and massage and exercise, and critically important. But there's a fourth. And he said, well, what would that be? And I said, the electromagnetic. And it's critically important. It can cause any health problem. And he just nodded and said, well, you're right, but I'm not giving up my pin. Because in applied kinesiology, you get a diamond pin when you get to a certain level. And it's a triangle. It's a triangle diamond pin for the lapel on your coat.
Right.
But I got his blessing on that. He agreed. He fully agreed. So you have to look at all 4 sides of the pyramid of health for any chronic condition, because a structural imbalance can cause any disease, any brain dysfunction, diabetes. I mean, there's so many case studies now of remarkable changes when you balance the structure. Just remarkable. It can't be ignored. And it's an area of expertise that you don't learn in a weekend, but you can appreciate and recognize at times when someone needs to include the structural component to health. The biochemistry we're all familiar with. That's pharmaceutical, nutraceutical, diets, water, air. The emotional or spiritual, most people do not put any time into learning very much about. And my experience is the vast majority of chronic cases that have been to every doctor in the world You know, they've been to many doctors, done many tests, spent thousands of dollars or thousands of pounds, and they're not better. There's a spiritual imbalance in there, emotional spiritual imbalance that has to be addressed in most of those cases. They don't like hearing that because they've done everything to avoid the trauma they experienced as a child or whatever the condition is. And I don't mean to make light of it at all, but when you find the right practitioner to work with and you bring some balance to that side of your pyramid, health changes are dramatic. And then the electromagnetic, so that you can't put a battery to your brain. You know, all these people walking around now with ear pods, you can't do it without consequences. You know, and Wi-Fi, just turn on your phone. How many wireless networks does your phone register right away? We were in a hotel in Poland a couple days ago, and our room was at the end of the hall, and it was a huge hall. And I was playing music on my speaker from my phone, which is wireless, which is a compromise on my part. I'm not a perfectionist. And I had to go down to the front desk for something. And I came back up the elevator, and I turned the corner, and our room is all the way at the end of the hall. So it's maybe 20 rooms on each side, doors on each side, all the way down the hall, maybe 20. And as soon as I turned the corner, my phone went doo-doo-doo, and it connected to my speaker that was still on because I was in the room, and I had to walk down to the front desk, and I come back, doo-doo-doo, and I looked, and I said, wow, that's the power of that speaker. And that's the power of this phone, of what kind of a signal it's sending. And you keep your phone in your chest pocket and wonder why you have cardiovascular issues. You know, you have to deal with the electromagnetics in life. You have to. So the pyramid of health is that concept for all practitioners that we may specialize in the biochemistry and you're great at diet nutrition, but you also have to learn a little about the other side so you can recognize when a patient needs some guidance on one of the other aspects of the pyramid of health. I've got, and I recommend people get these. I don't know how well they work, but they're, you know, the cover on an iPhone that locks EMFs. I know they work. I had, when I was living in the U.S., I had Acura, my car, and the SUV, the Acura. And as I walk towards the car, my key says to the car, "Here I come." And so the dome lights inside turn on and the lights shining down to the ground outside the driver's door activate. And I didn't touch the key, but the key is talking to the car, right? But sometimes I'd walk to the car, the lights didn't come on. And I said, "What's going on here? How come, why does it happen sometimes not?" Oh, my keys. Because I was holding the keys in the same hand as my phone. So the phone was blocking the key from sending the message to the car. So it helps. You know, it's not going to be a sure cure, but it helps. And it's all the little things you do in life that help to some degree that accumulatively will make the difference.
And this is what you mean by base hits win the ball game.
Exactly right. That's why I sign every book the same way. Base hits win the ball game. I ask the person their name, write their name down, and base hits win the ball game, and then I sign it. Because it's all the little things you do as you put this stuff on your ceiling and you go, wow, I want to learn more about that. And as you develop that skill in your life, you become the expert on that particular topic because you've read more papers on it than your colleagues who are really smart people. They just haven't had a chance to read that amylase trypsin inhibitors activate toll-like receptor 4 in nanomolar concentrations. It's like, what? A billionth of a gram? Yeah, that's all it takes. That's all it takes. So how do I protect against that? You take the digestive enzymes. Anytime you eat something that may be contaminated with some remnants of wheat, you know, you start learning what to do, but you first have to know how to ask the questions. And you don't get that by following along with what everybody else does.
Zechariah 4 verse 10. For who hath despised the day of small things? The phrase despise not small beginnings encourages people not to overlook or undervalue the initial stages of any endeavor, as they can lead to greater outcomes. Let's connect real quick before closing out today's session. Are you ready to step up to the plate and swing for the fences as we uncover the mysteries of what truly constitutes a hit in your health journey? Get ready and batter up. Did you know you could fix your brain? Did you know that your gut was so important? that all dis-ease begins in the gut? And finally, what base are you on? Well, there was a lot there to glean from, wasn't there? And I hope you enjoyed this episode. Free information is at our fingertips. Don't you agree it would be prudent to take advantage of it? These experts are gracious enough to share their knowledge. I'd like to close with this verse, Deuteronomy 30, verse 19. I have set before you life and death, blessing and cursing. Therefore choose life, that both thou and thy seed may live. Until next time, live your best life now. Choose life and blessing today, and live free and to the fullest for His glory.